Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Supervising Street Outreach Staff and Programs. I'm Suzanne Wagner. This is session 2. Andrea's with me. Andrea, want to wave and say hello? Okay, you're muted, but she's there. She'll pop up in your screen. I know we kind of when you're talking, uh
Hi.
people pop to the top. Ah, there we go. Hi, Andrea. Okay. And we're thrilled to be back doing these trainings in partnership with Demas with Molly Machado. Molly, you want to say hello?
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to everybody who was here for part one and anybody who missed part one. Welcome to part two. Excited to have you here and excited that our friends at Housing Innovations are able to host these sessions on supervision for outreach. Welcome, welcome.
Thanks, Molly. Molly, thanks. It's a gift working on this project and working with Molly. Um, and I didn't put a poll in about how many of you were here last time. We often do that, but I don't think I did this time. But nothing today is dependent on what we talked about last time, but we will do a little bit of a recap so you're not completely in the dark if you weren't here last time. But Andrea and I are presenters, and for people who haven't met us before, done a lot of work supervising programs and especially with very vulnerable populations. And we love street outreach. And our goals, we know you're busy, we know you have a lot to do, we know things are bumpy all over the place, is to give information that you can use right away that's helpful, maybe some aha moments, maybe meeting some new colleagues. Be careful of Sylvia if you're in the breakout group. So we do a few breakout groups every time and try to mix you up so you get a chance to connect. And people have actually asked for more of that. We will have a poll about that later. And we do like interaction, so don't wait for us to pause. We do have polls, we do have breakouts, but you can just raise your hand or put stuff in the chat or just unmute yourself. So we also like to kind of get a sense of who's here, but today there's only 820 people, but still a lot to go around individual introductions. Put in the chat your name, agency, where you are, can, town, whatever. And the question of the day to just clear the deck. And I'm telling you, with all this ice and snow and storms every three days, I am looking forward to the spring. And I have a lot of answers for this question, but put in the chat, what are you looking forward to this spring? And I'll say it while people are typing their info that I thought one day it was sunny and warm and the earth smelled like it was defrosting. And I thought, oh, that's what spring smells like. So that's what I'm looking forward to, the smell of the earth as it melts. But let's everybody have a chance to. Okay, good. I see things are popping in the chat. Melted ice. Yeah, it's very icy. Got to be careful. We already heard about a few accidents with the ice. Yeah, seeing the flowers bloom, kayaking, yes. Open the windows, yes. Some of you are not ready for spring, or maybe not ready to say yet. It has been deeply winterous lately.
Don't want to get your hopes up.
Yeah. But it's good for people to know who's here. So put in at least your name and your agency and what can or your town into the chat box. Tulips, yay.
Yeah.
Okay, we have good spread. I see who's here. I'll just
Yo,
put stuff in the chat. Welcome, welcome.
Courtney, the question is, what are you looking forward to in spring?
no more cold weather activations.
Yeah,
Yeah,
a good one.
for outreach, that is absolutely true, right? It's been continuous, I guess, for the last couple of weeks, right? So, all right. Well, I hope you thought about it, even if you didn't share it in the chat, but something to just clear the deck. I'm sure you've had a busy day. I'm sure you've had a busy week and you have a busy week to come. So let's get into it. If you we do know some people don't have mics on their computers and their laptops, so you can join us by phone, and there's the number and the meeting ID and passcode. I think Lauren will pop it in the chat. Oh, she already has popped it in the chat. And I see long
Yeah.
walks. Yes, long walks, another great thing about the spring. I hopefully that works for everybody when we do the breakouts. So we like to, when we do a two-session training, kind of bring you back to what we talked about, because even though today is different and independent content, it certainly builds on what we talked about last time, and we'll be reinforcing these concepts today about using a model of supervision where we're thinking about three major areas. We have an administrative role, things to reports to do, documents to get, paperwork to get done, an educational role with staff, and a support role with staff. Educational being either, teaching them skills, arranging for trainings, arranging for people to teach them skills, teaching them to teach each other skills, but an educational function, and then the support, because this work is hard. There's a lot of issues people we're serving of complex traumas. People can get vicariously traumatized through this work, as well as, we want to do, since we can't pay people a lot of money, we want to make sure we support them professionally in developing, because that is kind of one of the perks of this field, is that we can put things in place to help people move forward in their careers. So we also talked about the goals of supervision and really making sure that really effective practices are delivered and clients are getting quality services. We talked about a lot of the general roles of supervisors, and we compared it to, kind of being like an 20-armed goddess or god, managing and juggling, not only supervising direct staff, but also as an intermediary with the agency, an advocate for resources for staff, and then also a liaison to community resources is another key role of supervisors. And then we talked and kind of broke it down, talked a little bit about some of the things I'll pick up on one-on-one meetings because they are kind of the foundation of the supervisory structure, but talked about supervision is more than just a meeting, right? It's more than just a meeting. It's more than sending staff to a training, but it's really a lot of different interventions that we do or agencies do. And we talked about using one-on-one meetings, team meetings, case reviews, clinical consultation. We talked about modeling a lot, which I think is really helpful in outreach and helpful with staff. And then we also talked about kind of the systems and programmatic pieces of supervision and outreach, which is making sure we're getting access to those community resources. People need resources. That's a big part of doing outreach and engaging folks, is connecting to housing, connecting to benefits, connecting to healthcare, et cetera. Talked about the importance of making sure staff are prepped for the housing piece of the work. They know the cans, they know the options. We talked about training and staff training. We'll talk about that again. And then finally, we did talk about modeling and promoting self-care, right? And that's a really important part of the work, is both to do it and help people do it. So we have a quick poll. We did talk about a lot. It was a busy session, to ask what you've used if you were here in the last session, but if not, what you've used in the last 2 weeks, which is since the last trainings 2 weeks ago. What supervisory interventions you've used since the last training session in your own work. So individual meetings, one-on-one meetings, team meetings, case reviews. We know a lot of you are using team meetings, as we had a poll on that last time. Modeling interventions and role plays, chart audits, documentation review. Boring sometimes, but important part of the work. But sometimes it's not boring. Sometimes in chart reviews, we learn stuff about how practice is happening. Anyway, sorry. Building connections to community resources and/or clinical consultation services, advocating with the agency, which is a huge part of the job and probably not the easiest. Modeling, promoting self-care, or arranging trainings, providing orientations for staff. It's a long list. And this we had to chop because Zoom only allows 10 options. So we could have had 15 options here. That's why we saved one for other. So if there's something else you've been doing, you can just pop it in the chat in terms of supporting your staff, your team, your CAN, the people who are unsheltered in your area. Okay. It's a long question, but I think we're good. I think we have about 2/3 of people have responded. So I'm gonna stop share the results. Hopefully you can see that. Okay, so the big hits here are team meetings and one-on-one as it should be. I think those are, core functions. Great. About half of you have been doing case reviews, modeling, chart audits. Oh, more than 50% doing chart audits, advocating with the agency and modeling self-care at 62%. What's great. And arranging for providing training about 40%. So you're doing it all, doing a lot, and it's so great. I guess I would just say this. I say this a lot when we work and train with our Connecticut partners, that the practice here is really, really, really good and supports staff. So thank you for doing that. And hopefully you got some supervision. We talked also about that too, and we'll continue to really reinforce that, is that you also need support in your job, and hopefully you're getting it with colleagues. Some people pay for supervision, but hopefully it's not a one-way street and you're just giving, giving, giving. Okay, so what are we going to do today? So that, build with the bridge. One thing that came up in some of the discussions, and I think was really is a great example of inductive learning, was kind of talking about how different staff learn differently, right? And we learn that even though we're doing one-on-one with people, that not everybody learns the same way. So we're going to go into adult learning principles a little bit, which I think you'll find interesting. I found that helpful in my work. I find it helpful in my work today, to think about how adults learn when I'm trying to get them to do the things I want them to do, which is kind of what you're trying to do. Then we'll talk about some of the key roles in outreach that are listed in the standards and in the guide, the manual. The outreach standards. I don't want to call it the manual. The outreach standards, which have really been the basis for a lot of this training, is making sure you're exposed to that guide and to the content that's in there. And there is specific content for supervisors in there. And so a lot of stuff in here today is really from the book. And so we know we took a poll last time. A lot of you are looking at it. You're using the standards. Hopefully they are helpful to you and you're getting familiar with them. And we'll go into outreach plans, which are also in the standards today. And I know people are interested in that. And then we'll wrap it up. We have a ton of resources for you guys, as always. And just in terms of today's resources, Lauren has popped the slides in the chat. If you want to download them, you're welcome to use them, and you're welcome to follow along with them or read ahead, whatever you want to do. You're adults, and that's a perfect segue into adult learning, because when we are thinking about adults, it is different from teaching children. Some of you may be teachers. Excuse me. Some of you may be teachers, but adults and children are different. And so one thing is respecting people as adults and treating them like adults. So we try to do that, right? And people are going to read ahead. People are going to leave early when they have something else to do. People are adults. Adult learning is motivated by problems or a need, something the person needs to solve or address, right? So there's a goal there. It's usually a practical thing. Adults are self-directed. Some people like to read. Some people like to go to training. Some people like to do both. Some people learn by trying things out, by practicing with their supervisor in a role play. Some people hate a role play, right? But it's also relevant to what the person is thinking about. So, sometimes people ask us to do trainings when staff have been there for like 1 minute in their program. And frankly, they don't really even have any experiences with the clients or with the agency. And it's hard for them to hang the knowledge on that, right? That the knowledge is, we're constantly trying to connect what we're teaching them to the work and what they're experiencing on a day-to-day basis. So it is relevant to things that they're experiencing in their work. So it's important to think about those things as you're working with staff. I think there's a couple of other things I found helpful along the way. As a person who does a lot of lectures, you can see on the right side is a nice pyramid about how people learn. And only 5% of people learn by lectures, right? So, but teaching others, as you can see at the big bottom of the pyramid is 90%. right? So reading is it's the way people learn, watching a video, seeing a demonstration, having a discussion. Discussions are really a good learning experience, and which is good because we're using them a lot because they work on Zoom. Um, Practice by doing it. Of course, that's a great way to learn things, and then teaching others. And we talked a little bit last time about giving staff an opportunity to become trainers or train little bits of knowledge or become consultants internally. So that they can teach new staff because you always have turnover, but also grow professionally. Some people want to be trainers. And then, just another kind of basic framework that I think is helpful is to think about, and especially this is for me because I'm a deductive learner, which is the difference between inductive and deductive learning. And deductive learners are people who get the 30,000 foot, the principle, what's the principle, and then they can apply it in cases. And in the inductive learner, it's looking at a case and then they can go to cause, right? And they learn by looking at the specific example. I think about the example I shared last time that one of the best supervisory experiences I had was watching my supervisor voluntarily hospitalize a 17-year-old female who was experiencing voices. And I was with him, I was there as a support, and I watched that and I learned how to hospitalize someone. We did have a policy on how to hospitalize someone, but reading that policy would not have taught me how to hospitalize people the way that observing him doing that work taught me how to hospitalize people. And, it was a good learning as a worker, but also as a supervisor about showing people how to do the work and demonstrating compassion, demonstrating the skills and the stance you want people to have, and showing people how we want them to be in the work because this is work with people. So, and people can have a mix, right? So I could in that moment I'm primarily deductive, but in that moment of watching the situation with Iris, I was really an inductive experience because I took a lot of things from that experience and generalized them. I could see what did Rob do here, and I could generalize from that as well. So, okay. So I think I made the point. And when you're thinking about your staff, maybe this is helpful, maybe it's not, maybe it's helpful. And I think for me, it's helpful to remember that some people like to read, some people really learn by observing, and not everybody is the same, which you guys brought up. So now let's just ask you a question. And maybe I should have one more option. We should have one more option in this poll. Is what kind of a learner are you?
Hmm.
Oh, we did have both. Okay. Are you a deductive, inductive, both, or other? Always just want to be open to possibilities. Omni learner. Thank you, Sylvia. I like that. I like that. Deductive. Okay, we're getting a few boths. We tend to have one way or the other that we go. So while you might, right, I'll definitely come clean. I'm definitely on the deductive side. I'll say Andrea, I can speak for her, right?
Yeah,
This goes really more, she's the deductive. She's always looking at individual circumstances and patterns emerge for her from individual
inductive. Yep.
circums.
I'm
Yeah.
totally on inductive, and I'm working on the deductive. Always.
We've given up on a deductive with her, but anyway, the poll, um, and share the results. Okay. So we have a mix of a lot of people are both, and that's great. And you'll think about which way you lean. But also with your staff, I'm sure you'll notice which way they lean. And we have a couple of deductives and one inductive. I think in this field, I will just say as a supervisor, since I'm of the deductive side, I tend to teach people that way. And that's not always the most helpful thing to do, right? When you're talking to somebody who really learns from an example or from a case and or a situation. So we want to use a lot of different techniques. That's the bottom line from all this. Um, and now I'm going to just move into, as we said, kind of the key roles. So we have our heads set about us, about how people learn. And we talked about some of these things. There is in the standards, on pages 25 to 27. We do have a link to the standards in the slides. If you haven't bookmarked it or put it in, a special place in your system or your computer, there's a supervisory checklist and there's a section for supervisors and supervising outreach. Because as we talked about last time, a lot of times people don't get guidance on how to do what they need to do. So there's the standards. It's the underlined greens tend to be links. There's a summary of changes. These standards have been around for a while. And you can see in the content, there's a whole section on supervisory standards. So hopefully they're useful to you. And we talked about individual and group supervision last time. I did mention these, but we want to make sure you have the kind of requirements in front of you in the training, that a minimum in the standards is to provide a minimum of 1 hour with staff every other week, right? And that is, if you can achieve that, that's great, because it's hard to, with direct service, to do that. The golden rule in social work school was once a week, but I'll just say it was a brief time in my life that I had weekly one-on-one supervision. But it depends on what you need to do. And sometimes you're using huddles, you're using teams. So you are contacting with people on a much more frequent basis, but to at least spend some one-on-one time every other week. So we talked about huddles, and then we're going to talk about the outreach plan. But when we're doing supervision, we want to make sure people are aware of the plan. That is an administrative tool, is to do the outreach plan. And if you don't know what it is a plan that's required by DEMIS to be, we'll talk about it at the end, to be submitted twice a year, and really should be the roadmap, if you will, for your outreach work in your CAN. It should be the plan that includes your partners and how you're approaching homelessness in your CAN. And your staff should be on it and in it, because they do outreach and canvassing and be familiar with it. So it's also important to use the one-on-one time to go over that, and specifically any work that a particular individual has to do. Molly, did you want to say something about the outreach plan? I saw you nodding.
Nope, just the outreach plan is exactly how you described it. It should be a tool that helps your community, not an administrative thing that gives you a headache. So if it's not working in that way, we can also connect and talk locally about how to try and get it to be more of a tool. Thanks, Suzanne.
Yeah, thanks, Molly. And we'll go over, we'll pull up the template today. We'll talk faster. I need to talk faster. Let me move on and hand this over to Andrea. Because I think it's good sometimes to just go over the tool together, all see it, and we do plan to do that today. And hopefully it is useful. So one more poll, a lot of polls today. Some days there's more polls than others. Is to what extent, I have to read this, your outreach project is doing these things. No, that's the wrong one. Supervisory supports. Launch the poll. To what extent is your outreach program doing these things? Providing supervision weekly, hosting huddles, or helping staff plan their work in concert with their outreach plans. You're doing all these things, you're doing one of these things, two of these things, or planning on these things, put in the chat. We should say this, a good time to say this, that the polls are all anonymous. So you hopefully can be honest with us. And if don't be shy. This is meant to be a learning and a supportive environment. And we know, and I didn't really acknowledge this as much as I should have in the recap, that supervision is the first thing to go when you have shortages of staff, when you have a lot of crisis, when it's freezing cold out and you have to get people inside, that's when it goes, and maybe you do it on the fly. So we respect that and we honor that and we know that. And you're trying to do the best that you can, but we know that sometimes it's hard to do everything. So that's a little bit of self-care for you. So what are the results of this? 40% of you are doing all of these things. 30% are doing two of these things, and 30% of you are planning to implement these things. And a lot of your programs are new. There's been a whole reorganization. If you're new to this process, outreach has been going through a lot of good changes over the years in Connecticut, over the last, I would say, 5 years. to really align things. And it's kind of in a dream state right now, I think, with having really coordination by cans and hopefully really addressing the needs of the diverse populations. And having a set of guidelines that everybody is working under so that there's consistency in the practice. And then, of course, all this support that you're getting. So hopefully that's also helping. So I think I'm handing it over to Andrea. She's always good at making sure you get your paperwork in on time. This is one of her favorites.
That's the thing I'm worst at. But you know what? It's important, particularly now. Okay. So let's talk about what the structure is for doing plans. One of the things is we want to complete a plan, and we're going to go through it, but it's an assessment and a plan, right? We want to complete it, and it's been cut down a lot. We're going to complete it within 30 days of enrollment, right? Are you going to get everything? God, no, right? But you're going to get as much as you can. You're going to have the discussions, and you're going to introduce people to them. And then you have to update it at least every 90 days, keeping in mind that assessments and plans unfold over time and that they're only as good as how much you use them. So you want to use this assessment and plan every time you meet with somebody. That's really important. You want to think about if it's client-centered. Are we asking people enough questions? Have they identified what motivates them? Have they identified what they really want? Have they identified what their plan is? We're going to break it down to achievable, measurable steps, right? Nothing succeeds like success. Another way to put it is in motivational interviewing, we talk about competency and confidence. We want to give people credit for moving forward, right? That means they'll try something else. So we also want to trigger ourselves if we have to relook at it. Maybe it's not a goal or a step that they really want. Maybe it is, maybe they want something different. Maybe the steps aren't workable for them. Maybe they need more help. We want to trigger ourselves to take a look at how people are achieving these goals to regroup and reframe them. We also want to make sure it's signed by the participant, the outreach worker, and the supervisor. Sometimes participants are reluctant to sign. People can certainly make an X. You can witness their signature, but you want them to be included, and you want this to be their plan too. And this is one of the ways to do it, but the best way to do it is to talk about it every time you meet with somebody. You also want to address the roadblocks and do some problem solving with the person and use this as an opportunity. So we're going to pull up a sample assessment and a plan. You guys all have seen these
I didn't
plans.
have it queued up to pull up.
I do. I can.
Okay. All right. So I'll stop my share.
Okay. All right. Let's see here. It was queued up. All right. Let's see. Sorry.
I can queue it up pretty quick.
Here. I've just got it. I think I got it on Word. Assessment service plan. Yep, I got it right here. I'm going to share this. Sorry.
You know what? I have it open now, so I'll do it.
I do. Okay.
It's
Sorry.
just, it'll be easier for me, and then I can just jump back.
Okay.
Sorry, I just didn't prepare myself in advance.
Me
I think
neither.
it's
I
up
had
now.
it, but all right. So here's the sample assessment and plan, and this is filled out. So most important thing is what's the person's plan to end their homelessness? I'm not saying it's always going to be a good plan, but you want to know what their plan is so you can work with them to problem solve. It's a good question. We found out in Cleveland when they started asking people that question that about 60% had a plan. So it's a very important question. Then what motivates them? What's important to them? Safety. Her dog, in this case, right? What's important? I'm not going to go through everything like this. Then you're going to ask the questions, right? How does this affect their housing goal, right? That long-term plan. Then you're going to describe where they were, where they lived, and how long they lived there. You want to look at roles because you want to play on those roles that they've had before, right? You want to ask them the factors that led to homelessness. Remember, this might be a traumatic experience. They may not be able to share that with you or willing to share that with you at this point. We're going to come back to that. We're going to ask them to describe the place, right? This is a narrative. This is a storytelling time to have people do it. We're going to ask people about the military because there are a lot of extra benefits. We're going to ask them who their resources are, and we're going to ask them who their emergency contact is. And then as we go down, there's strengths in each of these categories. And these are the categories that we know are critical for people achieving access and stabilization in housing. So I'm just going to pick one, right? Family and supports. Amanda is a good friend, and she'd like to connect to her niece who lives in Waterbury. Those are all good information, and we want that stuff, and that's a huge strength, and we want to give people credit for that, right? Remember, if people feel confident, they're more likely to try things. And then there's a list about the barriers, which we also want to address in the context of the strengths, right? And you've seen that list before. Then you want to do a summary about what are the most significant barriers, what are the most significant issues with the person's safety or well-being. Comfort, safety, and well-being are priorities, especially for people who live on the streets. And then any other comments they gave you, and then we're going to go to the service plan. So it tells you if this is an initial plan, if this is an update, right? And then it goes through outreach staff tasks. Why is that important? Because they should know what they can count on you for. Participant tasks also, because there's a mutual accountability here. In the rapid rehousing one, we added a resource. It's a little crowded to do that here, but that's something you really want to think about. It's in the areas that lead to housing stabilization, and they're in action steps. Refer to SOAR. Provide transportation to SOAR appointments, right? Because this is about getting SSI. So these are the initial steps, and you see the dates. Is this familiar to people, or is it working for people? Did people have suggestions? What do you think?
I think it works. My only suggestion, I don't know how you would do it because of the size of the paper, but we almost need more space sometimes to enter information in. But that would be my only, and I've tried to do it myself and I run out, even when I turn it another way and reformat it. That works a little bit better, but it's not.
Okay, that's something we'll definitely take a look at.
Yeah.
Hi, David in New
Hey.
London.
Hey,
If
David.
it could be made into a fillable PDF, it's a Word doc right now.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, David, good point. Yeah, thank you.
Some of us are handwriting challenged.
Some of us couldn't do a PDF if I could fly, but you know what? We do definitely. That's why we have a team, right?
There are people who know how to do that.
Yeah.
Delegate that task.
That's great feedback. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think that's the kind of stuff we want to do. This is different because it's not like the HMIS data. You know, have
Yeah.
little stories here that people are telling you, and then you want to have it electronically. And when you have it as a PDF, you can copy pieces of that. It's already in the computer. So, okay, are you done? Am I ready to go back to the
Of
slides,
course.
Andrea?
Sorry. Yeah.
No, that's okay. Just checking. All right. So there we go. Okay. So there we did the sample.
Yeah.
This
We're going to
kind
make
of
sure that we're focused on housing, and that means people are in the by name list, right? So that we're entering the data on people, we're talking about people, we're making sure that they're getting on that through the coordinated access network. We're going to ensure staff have information on housing options. Permanent supportive housing is not the only option, right? So there are other options. We're going to talk to them about all sorts of means of shared housing. They could pick a friend they want to live with. They don't have to be in the program. It could be a family member. There's all sorts of things. We're going to talk about renting a room. We're going to talk about all sorts of things, and we're going to really focus people on what are the services or amenities attached to each of those, what's the cost, how are they going to do that, and we're going to build a plan around that. But we have to really know what the requirements are and how people get prioritized, which is really important. I mean, they may be eligible for PSH, but the list is long and they may not be a priority. We want to let people know and we want to pursue other options. So it's a little housing problem solving there. We're going to review people's progress, and then we're going to talk about problem solving around barriers, right? So this seems to be hard for you to get a VOD. Let's talk about different ways. What are you worried about, right? We're going to have that conversation to see if we can help people. I think the initial, somebody said, if you can read it out,
I could read it. I think the initial assessment should be shorter and have core questions regarding housing, basic needs, and follow-up assessments if they stay engaged around are more comprehensive. I think this would increase enrollment and outreach and reduce stress of documentation. Thank you for that, Sarah. Do you want to speak?
Absolutely.
You want to say some words about that?
Yeah, and to be fair, I don't do outreach myself, but am I work for our backbone and give out.
Yeah.
We have multiple outreach contracts, and just there's concern of, from what I hear, concern of enrolling too many people in the program or over enrolling because then they're held accountable for the paper files. And then I think we kind of lose people in HMIS that are unsheltered because people are scared to take ownership of them due to then being monitored for their paper file and kind of, especially the housing plan. Like the housing plan, I think is the biggest concern because there's just so many people that they're interacting with on a daily, monthly basis, where I do think if there was like a case note template that was very basic, core comprehensive
An
questions
initial
of,
screen kind
yeah,
of.
an initial like housing screen within those 30 days that they did at time that was built into an HMIS case note template. And then if they did stay engaged, you're going to know that person much more, where at that reassessment, you're then able to dig into the work. Like, what have you done? What have appointments have you set up? What do we have coming up? What have, I think that it seems like a little bit more realistic in terms of how outreach actually plays out from what I've seen and like what I've heard from teams. But again, if outreach workers on this call say you don't know what you're talking about, I totally am okay with that too. But that was just my initial thought.
So
And,
really,
I think,
you go
sorry, I
ahead.
just wanted to add, thanks for sharing that, Sarah. I think there's like a lot of paperwork for outreach. I've taken on a lot of the data into HMIS for my team because it is pretty intensive, right? It's not just a simple template, you're done, you have to do this. There's multiple different steps, which I definitely think takes away from, I guess, in my eyes, like the true meaning and value of street outreach, right? Going out, engaging, meeting people where they're at. So that's just kind of me. I think the documentation that's required, I think, is a lot. But
Yeah,
we
we
get
do
through
have
it.
two different programs. Like I have programs that have outreach as a component. So I appreciate gathering all of that information, right? Because if we think they're appropriate, they're either going to be in PATH or H2H. So keep that in mind. I do have a different role. It's a much heavier touch usually when my outreach is involved. What I like about the questions, though, if you can get answers to them, is it does give you some history within the document that you can maybe use if someone else picks up that page and goes forward with it with the person. It gives you they may have some certain skills that are highlighted by that document that I don't know would necessarily be highlighted in a shorter document. Having said that, the most important thing is to get people connected in some way, even if it's a much lighter touch, a much lighter connection. So if that's getting in the way of it, then yeah, certainly let's have two different kinds of forms and one that meets your needs better but keeping the one that meets the needs of the programs I have better.
Sarah, let me ask you a question. Is one of the reasons why you want the lighter touch and the smaller screen when people are doing outreach is to get them in the HMIS system so that they can document their homelessness?
I think that's part of it. I think we lose a lot of folks. They fall into a placeholder, maybe generic enrollment. Maybe they don't do an out HMIS enrollment at all. I think we have very underreported unsheltered homelessness because of being, nervous about enrolling in an outreach program due to capacity with documentation standards. I also think to Cheryl's point, this brings up that we have multiple types of outreach, yet one standard for documentation.
Yeah.
And that like canvassing street outreach and path with intensive case management and a small caseload are completely separate. And like have very different capacities, purposes. But I feel like we have so much outreach that we've never had before that I do think we need to look at different buckets and apologies. I feel like I say this
Well,
a
and I
lot, but
think
having street versus housing focused outreach are two different things with two different documentation components.
Can I, Sarah, thank you. I think you've said this before.
Sylvia's
Thank you
David, I
for-
hate to be the
yeah. Oh,
nacer, but Sylvia had her hand up first, so
oh,
we'll
I'm
get
so
you.
sorry. I didn't see.
You're good.
David, you
Sylvia
can
was behaving herself.
I was.
What happens?
David,
What happens?
David, you can always interrupt me. Don't
Okay,
worry.
you go ahead and then I'll catch up.
I just wanted to, it's probably very similar to what some of the points that Sarah was making. However, street outreach used to be something different. It is now case management because we don't have separate positions anymore. In the olden days, there were separate positions, and street outreach workers did something that flipped people over quickly to something. But we have nothing to flip people to, so the street outreach worker has to have a smaller caseload. And they, because they do intensive case management, there's no one to give them to. And unless they go into shelter, and then still, that's questionable how much they're going to get.
But I think maybe one thing I was thinking, and then David, I'm going to pop right to you. Every assessment has a purpose, right? And then when I look at this assessment, this is really getting a very good history. I mean, I feel this is not a brief screen. I mean, this is a lot of history. I mean, it may look like a short form, but to get this person to answer all these questions, it's not a nothing burger, right? Forget about the plan. But I guess I heard some kind of a way to screen and record people. I guess that's the question, and maybe we need to bring this to a provider work group or discussion about what is the purpose of another tool that I think would maybe be a brief screener to get people connected, maybe get them into HMIS, but not with the fear that you have to now do a service plan and all this other stuff that maybe is it's not really going to happen with this person, or it's not going to happen for a while. David, sorry.
No, thank you. I should have raised my hand. But Sarah, thank you for what you said. I agree completely. And I think I've heard you say this before. I hope you'll keep saying it because we're in the same situation. Yeah, a little maxed out. Now we use the street outreach, DOH street outreach list as a place, frankly, to park people, which is terrible. Because it doesn't really bring any services, but it does get them on the by name list, and we can sort of kind of manage it a little bit, and then determine if we want to move them into our SNOFO funded program or not. It also helps, by the way, with the PID count, trying to think ahead sometimes. It also means I think you can do you can do a current living situation with those folks. So there's some record, even though they're not getting really any significant services.
So does everybody know, I'm just writing this down. Does everybody know what that DOH street outreach list is and how to get it? And does that sound like it meets this kind of, we need to just capture people with a little bit of data? Or is there a need maybe for follow-up? And then we could talk about how we might follow up with Molly and whether use maybe a quarterly meeting or we have a special meeting to talk about another tool.
Is it the paper tool, guys, that's the issue, or is it HMIS having the different types of things? Because we've done outreach under DOH, which was really great. to use the DOH framework in HMIS. Shifting with SNOFO and it being under DEMIS is a little burdensome. Data-wise, it's a little different. There's more questions, there's more assessments that are, DEMIS assessments, and it's got to upload to DDAP, so it needs different kinds of points, like one question that will give you an error is the person's address. Well, we don't have addresses to put in. So we do make up stuff now, but it's still like, it's an aggravating question to ask me a client's address when they're homeless. Sort of like, why do I have to have one more thing my brain's got to accommodate? That's a data thing. Why don't you just ask the zip code they're living in if that's what you want? But like, that's the kind of stuff in the assessments. I just have to say the DOH outreach one was like super great to do. It was so easy to do data on that. But this one is like, it's a lot of extra.
And part of this is to give you guidance to provide the plan and to provide the services. And I'm not familiar with the DOH. These guys might be, but did that provide that level that you could really build a service plan from it, or you could build it? So
Sure.
what I'm
Yeah.
looking for, yeah. Okay.
It wasn't
So maybe
about
we
that.
can,
It was
I
about,
guess I just. Go
it
ahead,
was
Sarah.
about HMIS data points and what you ask for, and when you ask for certain, when stuff is based on, first of all, like SNOFO, for instance, is not driven by a mental health condition. It's driven by homelessness. So it's in a mental health system. So all the things that they do and have to collect on data is driven by mental health stuff, which means you're going to have different requirements that we have to teach our staff to skip or answer this way, which I find really exhausting, particularly with staff turnover. As opposed to when we did outreach under DOH, there weren't questions like that. You didn't have to skip questions. It was all germane to homelessness and building a housing focused outcome. So, I mean, that's kind of what, for me now, PATH is deep mental health driven. Okay, it is a mental health program. So it's different, but the other ones are not. And I just find it that we're always like in HMIS, we're taking a square peg and fitting it into a round hole, and you create workarounds, and they're really time wasters. And they end up being a lot of fixing. It's a lot of time fixing. I reviewed 140 case records, like on an audit. The lists I had of data issues were exhausting. Just
So
saying.
Molly, I don't know if you want to say, how can we follow up on this? Because I know
Yeah.
we got a lot of stuff in the training. We're not going to be able to take much more time on this.
Yeah, so we do. I'm hearing a lot of stuff here. One thing I'll say, all the SNOFO funded providers, you should have gotten an invitation today. We've got a meeting coming up in which a lot of our breakout is going to be around some of this data collection stuff. So on the SNOFO front, we've got some scheduled time to talk about this coming up. Without saying too much, there is some sort of work in progress happening behind the scenes on the HMIS front. I know you all know about the app. We're also, exploring that case note suggestion from Sarah at some of the statewide data work that's happening. So there are some pieces turning, but I'm going to throw some time onto our next quarterly meeting in March to dedicate time. In the interim, if folks could send me, just as you're having these things that drive you nuts, if you could just shoot me a quick email or give me a phone call to flag some specifics, then we can kind of prioritize some pressure points. That would be super helpful.
Also,
And I
talk
think
about
that DOH assessment, if people have that, if somebody could throw that in the
Yeah.
chat,
yeah.
or make sure we get it. Lauren, I don't know if we have it already, the DOH assessment, because I could see where there's perhaps like, and I know Nutmeg is available and doing work to customize the HMIS. Like, it makes sense to have some way to get somebody in where you're not triggered to have to do so many requirements, right? Like, it's I don't know. Maybe I'm pie in the sky, but I understand that about outreach, that there's people, you're not ready and it's going to take a long time that you're till you get to a plan stage with them, but you want to have them listed in your system. Okay. So
Okay.
Andrea, go ahead.
Yep. So the other thing is help staff focus on the most critical tasks, meaning put time frames on them. Everybody should start a money process or getting more money um in the first 2 months or whatever your priorities are. Housing applications, everybody should be familiar with the housing options, start the housing problem solving technique. And you want to set them as daily, weekly, monthly priorities, and we want to make sure we're raising these with people. Finally, really conducting case reviews and helping with problem solving. You guys have staff with different kinds of skills and they can really help each other. And I've seen it in some of the case conferencing we do. And we really want to encourage that. And as Suzanne said, that's a really effective learning tool, both for the people that are participating, but also for the people that are helping others. So we want to do that. So we want to provide opportunities to talk about cases as much as possible and help with the problem solving, having it being a solution focused discussion. Okay. So, we want to we use the can. We talked a little bit about that, providing information on resources that staff need to effectively do their job. What are the resources within the can? This discussion that we started with is a good example. How do we get people on the by name list? How do we document people's homelessness? How do we do that in the simplest way possible? You want to develop those relationships with the key partners, have these discussions. I'm really happy Sarah's here today, and having people here is really helpful. And we also want to advocate to improve access and effectiveness of resources for clients. So that means giving the CANs feedback and giving the CANs feedback about the process, the evaluation process, and how it's affecting you. So having those discussions is really important. Okay, let's go to the next one. So we're going to take a discussion. We're going to make this shorter, right, Suzanne? Or we can do it as a group, big group. What do you want to do?
I think we can give them time to talk. I think we've been
talking at
we've
them.
been talking a lot. But I
Okay.
guess we didn't acknowledge your feedback, and I thank you.
Yes.
We can speed talk and we can add a session. Like this is
Right.
So there's a couple of ways we can get through that, but I want to just say that we really appreciate the feedback on the documentation and believe that documentation helps structure your work, right?
Yep.
And whether, it's paper or it's the computer, but that it should make sense given the flow of the work with the client. So thank you for that. So I think we give people 10 minutes to talk about this.
Okay.
And we'll speed talk or do whatever we have to do to get through the content.
So we're going to break people up into groups, and it's basically what are the CAN practices that are working well for the people that you're working with, the people you serve who are unsheltered, homeless in your area, and what would you like to hear from other CANs about how they do certain things that might be problematic, or you may have a great solution to share with other CANs, and those are both great things. So let's break up in the groups. Suzanne's going to break you up into groups. 2 hours on them. You want to get them HMIS access and training. That's very important, as we heard before. You want to orient them to the outreach plan and their canvassing locations. Once again, going with a more experienced worker. And also, what are the documentation requirements? And what's the plan for ongoing training? And how can they request training? And also how to use supervision. Those are all really important to onboard new staff. May take a little longer, but we found that especially supervision and access to training and professional growth really keeps staff in place, and that's something we really want. Okay, let's go to the next one. So workload management, I know this has been a hot issue for people. Supervisors are in charge of seeing if people are doing major tasks, ensuring that those are done when they are promised, canvassing, case management, documentation, data entry, coordinating with CAN partners. How is that done? Everybody doesn't obviously have to go to every meeting, but you want to make sure that that information is shared and that people have a relationship with them. The other thing is, how can you adjust priorities? I know that the verification out of 211 is a big issue for people, and that's something we can definitely talk about at a later date. How can you as a team member or a partner help the person get oriented periodically, look at caseloads. Sometimes caseloads become unbalanced. Somebody has all the high acuity people. Somebody may like all the high acuity people, but then either the caseload has to come down, or we need to think about how much time people are spending in there. So doing an acuity level, just a quick acuity level of service needs. You want to balance the other assignments. This is a long list. And you want to really focus on the staff's strengths, interests, and professional development needs. That's really important. So what would be interesting to them is a key element in workload balance because it keeps people engaged. Okay, so let's talk about performance. You want to conduct periodic performance reviews per the agency's requirements. You want to, encourage people. You want to talk about strengths. Absolutely. You want to talk about areas for growth. And then you want to talk about some key deficiencies that require a prompt remedy. And if there are deficiencies, you want to really address those directly. And you want to do it in a context of a supportive environment, but also being clear that this is the way that the agency provides services, and these things have got to be addressed. Timeliness is often an issue. I know it wasn't my performance to do reviews, so that's something we want to address, but just taking those examples and going through those. We want to also acknowledge individual contributions, and I thought that adult learning was really interesting, particularly that people are, teaching other people. People get a lot out of that. They feel competent, and other people get a lot about that. So that's a really good investment in time. And you want to help develop people's professional goals. I know a lot of your case managers are in school. They mention that a lot, giving them assignments that might reflect on some of that. And talking to them about what their future plans are. Like, wouldn't you like to stay with this agency when you finish your degree? Those are really important. And talking about what people are good at.
I think some of you provide like supervision if people have student field placements or tuition reimbursement. I think I know that nonprofits are always struggling, but those are some of the things I think that we struggled to do for people was to give them some chance to and even though the money wasn't a lot, we were flexible with time so people could go to school, right? And I think that thinking about people's professional development and figuring out how your HR supports or doesn't support that. I know I battled a lot this is one of those agency administration battles about why can't people work flexible hours and go to school, especially with outreach. Like a lot of people are up at 6 a.m. So, work from 6 to 2. And you can take a class. Anyway, sorry, just a little commercial there for supporting people to develop professionally.
Okay. The other thing we want to do is really talk to people about safety concerns and put things in place so that people are safe. It's really hard to conduct a case management intervention when you don't feel safe. It's going to color the whole intervention. The other thing is clients, their number one goal a lot of time is to feel safe. So thinking about doing it in pairs, I know that's difficult because some people have very limited teams, but think about it. And if you need somebody in pairs, thinking about maybe somebody else from your agency or even another outreach team to go out with you, really honoring those requests, making your schedule known so that people know to look for you when you come back. I'm not as worried about the interactions with clients, but maybe that's just me, but I'm more worried about getting there and the other people who are sleeping there. I think that that's something we want to really pay attention to. We want to be predictable as possible. We don't want to surprise people. So when we do check-ins, we want to let people know, because being surprised, oftentimes you get in compromised situations. And then you want to talk to people about safety and about crisis and about how they handle that crisis, because that's very important. We want to honor people's requests around safety. We want to make sure that staff know what universal precautions are and follow them. We want to review the client, and because universal precautions are a big deal. I mean, COVID's on the rise again, and that's something that with the flu and everything else, we want to really pay attention to that. And there was also other communicable diseases. So we want to make sure that we do that. We want to review the client's history. And that was one of the things in the plan to look for patterns and to orient ourselves and make a plan about how we can move forward. Angel, that's an adorable cat. We want to do some harm reduction plans. Harm reduction plans is intrinsically involves the client on telling you what they think. And the more people are involved in making decisions and feeling things aren't forced upon them, the safer you are. And then we want to build partnerships with local police and mobile crisis. We also want to talk to those programs to see how long it'll come out. If it depends on category of what we're asking people, we want to know that, and we want to orient all our staff to that. I'm going to do a quick thing on critical incidents. We can certainly follow up on this, but we want to see if we can. So these are some really good resources. I'm not going to pull them up for you, but they are there. I obviously went through them. It know what qualifies as a critical incident. So these are the categories. It starts out with death, but also there's other things that people maybe wouldn't, like if there's an injury, who you report, the specific reporting on overdoses. You want to know what the categories are and who you're mandated to report. This is reporting to DEMIS. It's not reporting to your agency, and you should have other protocols for that. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. There's a procedure to report a critical incident. There's a list of contacts, and there's also a incident reporting form, which leads you through it. And it's very specific to staff, as staff is involved, clients involved, or a visitor is involved. And there are less questions for staff and for visitors, but you want to make sure that you are familiar with the critical incident report. Staff should be familiar with the critical incident report. I'm aware that they're not always the first ones that are going to fill out the critical incident report, but they should know what's in it. And then you want to look at your agency's protocol for looking at critical incidents. So as we go to the next one, we're going to talk a little bit about that, managing critical incidents.
Sorry.
If I'm talking too fast and you guys want to say something, feel free. Just unmute and talk, or raise your hand, or say something. So it's important that every agency or every program conducts their own critical incident review. And there should be protocols in your agency for that. And that you want to know what went well. You want to set this up for us as a supportive process, but also to look at your protocols and look at your direction you're giving staff to see if you missed anything. This is not a pointing fingers at the individual staff. This is about figuring out how we can do things better the next time. And there's always a way to do things better. It doesn't mean it was bad. It just means we want to do things better. So we want to know what can be done differently. We want to know about, do people need more training? Do people need more resources? What resource a common question in critical incident is, what resources could you have called? So I'm going to give you an example. Could you have called mobile crisis? Yes, but mobile crisis takes 24 hours to get there, and that wouldn't have helped in that incident. Okay, that's something that we want to talk about. I'm not saying mobile crisis does take 24 hours. I'm just, in some places it does. I have not heard that in Connecticut, but you want to figure out, like, what are the best resources, because people should have resources at their fingertips when they're in this kind of crisis. And if it's going to take a long time, they need an interim plan. You're also going to provide support to staff. And this is not a pointing fingers exercise. I know people are afraid of critical incidents, largely because they feel awful that something happened, right? And always your first instinct as a case manager is to say, oh man, I really messed that up. But you know what? You might not have. You might have needed more support. You might have needed more things. And what did you do with the incident? And really supporting staff through that. And then talking about how they can get more support in that sort of situation and how they can help other people who may be in the same situation later. People fear criticism or getting in trouble. There may be trauma involved. There usually is trauma involved. I mean, the worst thing you can see is somebody else suffering. And oftentimes in these critical incidents, you do see people suffering, and that's very difficult for staff. I mean, I would prefer my clients were happy all the time, though I've never achieved that, but neither have they. But you know what? I think that, it's a very difficult thing for staff, and we want to key into that. People may be afraid to come back to work. And that may be an issue for them. And you know what? Frankly, if people are really scared and we can't work through it and we can't work through the trauma, that might not, then that might be a possibility, or they may need another job. But you know what? We want to help people work through it and feel safe. And what would it take? We want to ask people that, just like we ask clients that. And that, it can change the relationship with the coworker, right? We want to be really mindful of that. And, if they say Suzanne's always the one who's asking for people to go with her, which is not Suzanne's personality, okay? But, other people start to say, I've got my own caseload. I don't have time to, right? Let's talk about that, how we can support each other, what the situation is, what the reason for it is. And we want to really honor people's feelings, but we also want to deal with the fact that they just don't want to see anybody alone. That's a problem. Right? Because you just don't have the staff for that. So you're gonna sort of work that out. It's a combination of individual and group sessions. The other thing it's really important is if you do a critical incident, you want to debrief with the staff. It could be the supervisor, it could be somebody in critical incident, to go through it with them and let them talk about what they're feeling and what they're worried about and what their suggestions are. And also you want to do all these same things there. It might be in the critical incident meeting, it might be afterwards, but the debrief is really important for staff to maintain their positions. Okay.
So there's a question in the
Oh, good.
okay, and Molly just answered it. In order to complete a critical incident report, do you need to have access from DDAP? And Molly writes, yes. CIs can only be submitted if you have access to submit critical incidents, CIs.
Yeah, there's a ton of info on the DEMIS critical incident page. But if folks have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out.
How do we go about getting DDAP access? We're gonna I know we'll get to at least these slides on data. There are links in the PowerPoint about getting access to DDAP. Right on this slide, it's slide 24. There's the data system, there's the portal for DDAP, I guess, and here's who to contact for help. So hopefully that helps, Liz, with you getting access to that.
Good question. Okay. So we're going to do a short discussion, 10 minutes. Introduce yourself.
I just want to note to people, because you lose the whole chat when you go into a breakout group. And Lauren has put a ton of resources in the chat, critical incident policies and harm reduction plan. I mean, we can always repost it, but I just wanted to fill up a minute and say, so if people wanted to download those resources or click on them beforehand, and we can always send things later. Okay.
The information on critical incident reporting is also attached to the PowerPoint.
Linked.
Sorry.
Linked. Yeah.
Sorry. I'm old school. Sorry.
Yeah. Andrea does use computers and apps, just in case people were worried.
Okay.
Okay. You know what? I'm gonna leave you guys to see the people you saw before. I usually try to mix you up, but you're gonna go back to the people you were just talking to.
So you
Maybe
know
we'll
each
get some
other.
deepening of those relationships. 10 minutes.
10 minutes. And you want to, Suzanne's going to
share this, and Lauren, you can pause recording.
Yeah. Suzanne just said there's a special place in hell for people who interrupt good conversations, and that certainly looked like one. So we're sorry about that. But anybody have anything they want to share about the conversation? Something they learned? Ways to support staff? Do you guys do debriefing? Is that helpful? Example of what you want to implement? How do your staff react to critical incidents? Any of that. You don't have to. Looks like you were talking to each other, which is the most important thing.
Sarah just unmuted.
I saw.
Yeah. Um, it was good conversation. It was extremely depressing. I think our group really talked about what an increase in like death, amputations, burns, like
Ooh,
just everything we're seeing right now with all of our folks and kind of are we even processing it because it's happening so frequently at this point? Um, I don't know if we really got to the root of what the slide was about, but just wanted to like give shout out to like, I don't know, I get just acknowledge everyone on the call and like all the work that everyone's doing. It was just
yes.
it's not siloed to like just our community. Like the amount of tragedy that's happening to the folks we're serving across the state right now is just like really overwhelming in the room. Um, so I just wanted to like acknowledge that and acknowledge all the folks in my room and like on the call for that.
That's a great thing. I mean, supporting staff is a big part of this, and it is overwhelming how tragic some of these critical incidents are. And,
The
I
things
mean,
people go through.
yeah, and the work that you do, right? And helping, not helping prevent it and helping to people able to deal with it. Yeah, it's a great thing. Okay.
Yeah. We honor and we bow down to outreach staff. It is really difficult
Yes.
work, and in the freezing cold, it's the worst, I think, when it's really like the way it's been lately. That's why don't forget you thought a little bit about the spring happy time because
Yes.
we've got to take care of ourselves. And Angel saw the reaction. Okay, I think I pick up now.
Yep. Yep.
So just a few things. We're gonna have a special session on data, using data, for the people who really like data, and also to make sure we do it justice. So you'll hear more about it. But as a supervisor, we do have a reference slide, which I already showed before, and we're gonna show that in a minute. But you want to make sure that people are doing the right data entry. There are different systems. Ultimately, of course, HMIS is the participant data system. And as Molly mentioned and has been discussed on these calls, there's an outreach interface through an app that's in development. But that's really where the client data goes. People who are funded under the HUD continuum of care, under the SNOFO, which is a special notice of funding opportunity, have HUD reports that they need to submit quarterly and annually. Those of you who are past funded have quarterly and annual reports, as well as an intended use plan, which hopefully is not as burdensome because everybody's doing plans for outreach anyway, but it's basically your plan annually for what you're going to do with the past money. You want to do some data quality reviews on a quarterly basis. You want to make sure you're fully enrolled. So as a supervisor tracking those enrollments, and that conversation was good about, you know, what we talked about before about who's getting enrolled, because I think we want to make sure the right people are getting enrolled, and that people are meeting their goals. And that conversation was helpful in thinking about how do we make that, what kind of structures can support people doing that. And as I mentioned, there'll be more on data to come on the outcomes that are tracked by the different outreach programs, and also ways to look at data and engage your staff in conversations around data. But this is a quick reference slide. Links are, again, all these links are live. So there's the HMIS link on the left, and we have the learning management system, which is where there's a lot of training currently on HMIS. The DDAP system, the link there, that's the DEMA system. They're working on getting as much crosswalked as possible, but it does need to be uploaded. And then there's a point in time database, which is used, and some of you might have been using it recently because just finished the point in time count at the end of January, and outreach had to do work in the PIT database for people who are not in HMIS, I guess, on outreach teams that don't use HMIS, but everyone I think on this call is using HMIS. And then you could see you have help contacts on the right. And I know I saw Molly put some help in the chat earlier about DDAP for folks about getting connected with that. And then there are HUD data systems. So this is any of you who are SNOFO, special notice, the HUD COC special notice of funding opportunity. There's issues going on the federal level with some of these things, but eSnaps is the HUD grant application. The SAGE is where you do your annual reporting. Zengen is a database that Housing Innovations manages for evaluations. Oh, no, for grants management, sorry. And then there's an evaluation database. Again, more to come on this. Contact are there. And then path projects, because we have a few path people. There's also a path data exchange. So we honor your work and we realize there's a lot of data sources. So I just want to
And path
support that.
providers, if anyone's panicking seeing quarterly reports, my brain did not catch that. We don't make you do
Oh.
quarterly direct into PDX here. Other states do that. So just don't panic. You just have to do your annual up in PDX.
Okay, thank you, Molly, for catching that
you.
detail. Annual. So path is annual only. Thank you. We'll correct that in the slide. Okay. Great. So the last few minutes of the day, we're going to talk about outreach plans. We've already referenced outreach plans. I know many of you have done outreach plans. There is a template in the standards for an outreach plan, and there's also a sample outreach plan in there, so you can have some examples. But everybody should know about the outreach plan because every can should have a good outreach plan, and it's really meant to be a can-based tool, the outreach plan, so that people can collaborate. When you have multiple teams and multiple people doing different kinds of outreach, you have the VA, you have PATH, you have SNOFO, to make sure that there's coordination, and that also, we're serving people the best way we can, try to avoid duplication and gaps, and making sure people are prioritized who are really vulnerable, and to provide some structure. And the outreach plan does set a structure up. And I think, in outreach, we know we know when we can see people, we know where people go, and having that structure can help with engagement. And then also, of course, can help you comply with your funders. So again, links that are in here, and Lauren is putting them in the chat again. Thank you, Lauren. There's an outreach plan template and a sample outreach plan. I'm going to show it to you in a second. First, I'll tell you what's in there. These are the sections of the outreach plan. And some of them will not change, even though you need to update this on a regular basis. Some things won't change a lot, some things will. But it is a comprehensive plan to really look at how are we covering our area, what's our schedule for where we're going to be, how are people going to reach us, what is the coverage plan when we have absences in staff, plans for uncovered areas. So Connecticut is big. Some of your cans have lots of woody areas. I know I've driven them. So, talking about those areas, identifying gaps in the system that affect your work, which I think is a really important thing to do. Plans for emergencies. I know, like right now, for example, cold weather is an emergency. Supplies for engagement, and then dealing with the public. And then there are required reviews, monthly by the supervisor and semi-annual by the CAN and DEMIS approval. So before I go there, I'm going to share it. I'm going to switch the share to take a look at the actual document itself. For those of you who haven't completed one yet, I know we have a lot of veterans on this call, but you can see it's CAN-based, lists your agencies and the geographic area, and it's a place to fill out. It's a Word document, your canvassing schedule. You see there are examples here, which agencies, which locations are being canvassed, Monday to Friday, what hours, office hours, where places where we are meeting people, we're encountering people like the library. Um, and also if people have dedicated, I know there's hubs now in every can, and I'm sure that that's become a place where people are meeting with folks. So the hubs would be included. Um, Specifically tracking the really most vulnerable clients. Now, we know you have a lot of vulnerable people in that conversation that we just taught about critical incidents because things people are going through a lot, but um, picking a few um, people who are extremely vulnerable and having a plan around them on a regular basis. And then if you're not canvassing or you're not doing inReach, is how to contact people in areas in your can. If they find someone who's homeless, so an example in Harleysville, which is a made-up town, but the mayor's assistant, there's a check-in on a quarterly basis, for example, and then schedule for any other critical tasks, like documentation, case management, then examples, and then a coverage plan during absences and particularly for vulnerable people, geographic areas that are not covered and the reason, and what your plan is to cover them going forward. And then systems gaps, like other community resources that are not at the table, which is a common issue, and plans to bring resources to the table. I think everybody has gotten much better at bringing like the health system in, unfortunately, probably because of the pandemic, to their efforts. I know that people have talked about local law enforcement more and engaging them in their cans. And then what's the emergency plan is in here. And then engagement supplies. So kind of tracking what you have and what maybe you're missing. And then how do you deal with the public if the public is contacting you about a homeless person? And then the final. So it is a long plan. And I know we just heard about people have a lot to do, but some things may not change every time. It is meant to be reviewed every month. So it's a good thing to do um, in a monthly team meeting is just go over the plan. It gets easier and easier if you're doing it to make sure people are aware of that. And there's a place for signatures on it, which are for the cans required twice a year to sign off on it, and then it goes to Demas twice a year. So I'm going to shift back to the PowerPoint because some of those requirements are in there. So to discuss the plan with your team, to discuss the plan of the can, and sign it and submit it for approval. So the dates for due dates for the outreach plans are March 31st. So one's due in about 5, 6 weeks, and then September 30th to Demas. So this might be very timely if you need to take a look at your outreach plan and get it updated. We're right on the schedule. So I know I talked about that fast. I want to just make sure I didn't skip anything that was important because I did go fast. Okay, so we only have a few minutes left. And maybe we'll just do this as a large group discussion if anybody wants to shout out, how are you using this in your can to update it or processes you would like to implement? Does anybody want to share kind of how they're dealing with the outreach plan in their can? Is one agency doing it and then other people are filling in? How's it going? We wore you out? Nobody wants to talk?
Huh.
David? Okay.
Yes,
Oh,
in Eastern, Elisa at Reliance updates this plan a couple times a year, sends it around for all of us, and I always go through it. It's not a sorry to be the critical one. It may be useful to the folks at Demas. It's not really a useful document, a working document for folks here in the field working in multiple agencies.
do you want to say a little bit more about that?
It's just the format of it. And, just looking at sort of the table of contents you showed, it's just a lot. All
It is a
good.
lot.
It's important information, but in terms of kind of a plan you can work, Um, well, to put it plainly, we review it and then it goes in a folder.
Thanks, David, for sharing and for being honest.
Yes.
Appreciated. And criticism is welcome because I think what we're trying to do here is
Yep.
as the outreach evolves is provide more support, take a look at what's there, change things up if they need to be changed up. So that's noted that the plan could be improved. How's that for a euphemism?
That's fine too. And again, I want to emphasize it's multiple agencies and each agency, under different funding and so forth. So it's however you format it, it's complicated.
Yes. Paul, your hand was up. Thank you.
Yeah, so as part of the PATH project for the last few years, I've been personally updating our outreach plan with our subcontractors in different parts of the county. But of course, like that's completely getting overhauled this year. So, one of our subcontractors this year is actually our backbone agency, the Housing Collective. And so, working with them, we've implemented countywide outreach supervisor meetings, sort of for the first time, bringing all the providers to the table. And part of the work in those meetings is this sort of overhauled outreach plan. And it's been, I guess, illuminating and really useful to have everybody together, really understand like who's doing what and where. And, it would be great to see it become more of a living document, I suppose. But I guess I'll echo as well what David said, that, in terms of taking, like, just for instance, like the canvassing schedule, I think it's very difficult to adhere to a regular canvassing schedule, largely because the demands are so great and so shifting, that especially given that there's a lot of encampments move. There's lots of rural areas where you aren't necessarily able to anticipate where people are going to present. I think it becomes less useful as a document that's reflective of the actual canvassing work going on.
Thank you, Paul, for sharing that. And I see some comments in the chat about the plan. Changing with the seasons, environment. Sounds like another thing to take care of and maybe take a look at as we move forward in terms of tools. And it sounds like, you guys, the plan is meant to really structure and organize outreach. So, it should work for you. And I get you about it's a document that, it maybe isn't as live as it should be. So, it duly noted. And also duly noted is 5 minutes left. So I'm going to move along because we do have a poll for you. But thank you for that feedback. And I definitely appreciate it. We all appreciate it. So after the last meeting, there was, or during the last supervision training, there was, comment made, to Molly about having some opportunities for supervisors to get together. You just talked about, Paul, that you guys have an outreach supervisors meeting, which may be fulfilling that need in your particular can. But so this is a question to everybody: is whether you're interested in meeting with supervisors from other outreach programs to share resources, best practices, challenges, etc. And then if so, how often seems practical? So yes, monthly, yes, quarterly, yes, twice a year, yes, as needed, maybe, not sure, no, or other, just to give people choices. Supervisors in our region meet monthly, but statewide would be nice, Sylvia says in the chat. If people, a couple more seconds. We've lost a couple people. I know people had to run. I got a couple of chats. We know people are really pulled in a lot of directions. That's why we wanted to ask this before anything was done. I'm going to end the poll just so we can finish on time and share the results. So nobody said no. So I guess we got a lot of support on that. And quarterly, I guess, kind of couple of votes for monthly, most four for quarterly, and then three for twice a year and one for once is needed. Okay. Well, that's noted and we will follow up on that. I'm going to stop sharing that so we can wrap up the session because it's 2 minutes to the end. So, like always, we have so much respect for the work that you do, and it's thinking about being a good supervisor and a good leader, and sharing our experiences with you has really been a great discussion. And you guys know we see how hard your jobs are and really have a ton of respect, but you're critical to making this work, and make sure you get some support. And as always, we have a lot of additional resources. So we have references, we have the lots of trainings, we have all the slides and recordings. There is an agency requirements webinar. So this would be for some of you, and for some of you, maybe you have QA people or other compliance people. So this would be like kind of agency level requirements um, for agencies receiving outreach funding. So that's set for May 21st. You'll get an invite. There's weekly HMIS hours for help office hours for HMIS. So some of you, I think, were asking about HMIS, but I'm not sure. But you can go to hours, office hours, communities of practice. The next one's in April, April 10th, and then June 12th. And the next lots coming up next month. Quarterly outreach meeting is on March 19th. And it is 2:59. There's our contact information. So we ended on time. So a little bit of speed talking there, but thanks you guys for coming. We have, as we said, enduring and lots of respect for the really tough work you're doing. So